There might be a problem in woodworking that needs a solution. A tool that is missing. And I intend to solve it today.
See, here's the problem. Say you've made a tabletop and you want to give the underside a hefty chamfer. Well, you might go with a router bit. This one is 45 degrees. It's a pretty common angle and this router bit isn't that expensive. However, if you want to get a quality chamfer bit that is, say, 70 degrees, you're looking at a much higher cost. And that bit might only be used a few times, so it will probably last a long time as well. But the risk is that you only use it once and pay too much for one chamfer. And what if you want a 77 degree chamfer next? So what do? Well, a lot of people resort to the table saw, because with it you can set whatever angle you want, but the downside is that you need to run the tabletop through the saw vertically. And whilst that works, it's risky, especially if you're doing a round tabletop. There must be another way. Yes, there is. When I made this stool, I instead made a router jig like this. The angle on this one is set to 13 degrees, meaning it will give a chamfer of about 77 degrees. The problem though is that if I want to do a 70 degree angle, I would have to make a new jig. And that would pretty soon result in a wall full of jigs that I don't want to throw away in case I want to use them more. So wouldn't it be great if we instead had one jig where we could adjust the angle on the jig itself and therefore only have one jig? It's a lot safer than using the table saw with sketchy cuts, and if I make this right, you could make one for yourself.
But that is just my idea, I would have to solve it first. So, as if it wasn't enough trying to invent a new jig, I also want to challenge myself by using only this machine. Or to tell you the truth, the sponsor of today's video, Snapmaker, actually challenged me to use their machine to make something. And I said, of course I can make something, right? But the thing is, I haven't even tried it out yet. As you can see, it's still in the packages. Plural. But more about that later, because first I have to actually figure this thing out. So let's take a look at the jig right here first. It's a very basic but working jig, and the design isn't mine. I made basically exactly what Sam from Monkey Boy's workshop told me in his video making this, so thank you, Sam. The angle of this one is determined by the blocks right here, and they are cut to 13 degrees. So if I had a way of taking them out and replacing them with pieces cut at a different angle, I would have something working. But that's easier said than done, because this has all been glued and brad nailed together. So another issue is this. This is where I place my router, and it runs up and down or sideways. And I made this jig to fit my particular palm router. But in order to make this fit all routers, I would need to come up with a different type of jig. Before the machine arrived, I had to build myself a workbench for it. So I made it the day before it arrived with whatever I had lying around. I'm not sure you have the same thing as me, but when I get excited about a project like this, I'm in a zone where I think this is such a good idea. But the zone kind of fades out after a while doing the project, and all of a sudden I just think that it might not be that good after all. Also, my problem is that I'm usually on a deadline. Meaning I just have a certain amount of time before I need to publish the video because of contracts. Otherwise, that zone of excitement might come back and I could end up working on a thing like this for months. But I don't know, I've never tried. That's been the case with this, for instance. I made this prototype sandpaper storage, then all of a sudden scrolling Etsy, I see people selling it. And I like it. It's like a confirmation that my idea was a good idea that people could actually sell. I still sell my 3D print files, of course. After a good amount of time, I had an idea in CAD of the router plate to start with, so I decided to start printing that, but first I had to assemble the machine. I actually enjoy this part quite a lot. It's not very unlike assembling IKEA furniture. I know some people don't like it at all, but to me it reminds me a lot of building Lego. But the assembly of a cool machine is even better because it's the progress to make something that has a lot of potential, but I also had a lot of expectations as well. But it wasn't just happy times. It is a bit stressful as well.
I've put all my eggs in one basket here. If I fail in making this jig, I have no idea what to use the machine for, and since they are the sponsor of this video with a timeline on it, I need this project to work. As you are watching this now, it's sort of a hint at the fact that I might get somewhere with it. But you can't be sure, this might all be a video of a failed project.
So this is a 3-in-1 tool. It's a 3D printer, it's a laser, and a CNC. Just saying that sounds crazy. Like if someone would have told me a couple of years ago I could have all those machines in one, I wouldn't have believed them. And I kind of underestimated how long it would actually take me to get this thing up and running. I don't know what I expected for a machine that has all these three things combined. And I was quite surprised to see that the 3D printer came with double extruders. The laser is a 40-watt laser and the CNC is a 200-watt module. Everything was just so well packed. I'm very impressed so far. Now the good thing is that it's supposedly very easy to swap out the modules. And it came with this enclosure, which is robust and great. Now this is a creative combo, so it actually comes with an air purifier and a rotary as well. Which means I can laser around objects but also do 4-axis CNC work. I mean, I have to try that.
After the unboxing, I was ready to start putting the machine to work, and I wanted to start with the router base. If I can have that working for me, I'll have a good start. So I started by printing that. The Snapmaker artisan build plate is actually 400 by 400 millimeters, so that means I could actually print really large objects on this one. And the clever thing is that it will heat the build plate in 2 sections depending on the size of the print. Pretty clever, Snapmaker people! As that was printing, I could also try to figure out the rest of my router chamfer jig. The working idea is to have these dovetailed angles that just slides into the base, and then inside of them I need to add some insert nuts so that I can attach it to the plywood base. So I guess once the 3D printer is done, and if my idea works, I can go ahead and print the angles and then CNC the plywood. The old jig was made with my palm router in regards, so measuring that led me to the width of the router base, but for this one I would like it to fit any router, so I decided to make it like a 2-sided vise. Once the base was done, I wanted to see if it worked the way I intended before printing anything else, so I added bolts in the 4 holes on the side of the print. These are M8 and a snug fit. Then I attached the walls in the dovetail tracks. Then I could thread the M8 bolts through the nuts, and before I insert them into the walls I attached these 3D printed knobs with threads inside, and these will push the walls of the base. And to be able to rotate the bolts I printed some knobs that press fit onto the bolts with my logo because of the double extruders of the Snapmaker, and that was easy.
So let's try the vise to see if it actually works before I move on to the next thing. I think I managed to get some CA glue into one of the nuts, so should probably be more careful with that. So I have this DeWalt palm router, so I'm going to place that in the center first. And then I can screw in these bolts. From both sides, and I don't want it too tight. I want it to be able to slide, but I don't want it to wiggle. And right now it seems to slide perfectly good. It's not gonna slip out of the vise. But if I would want it really tight so it can't move, I can actually lock these down pretty tightly. And now it won't move, and I'll show you why later, but that could be a use case as well. So I've already tried the Makita one, it seems to work as well, but I don't have all the palm routers in the world, if you could believe. So I'm not sure it's gonna fit all of them, but sure, this vise still needs some updates from the prototype version it's currently in. But at least the vise function seems to work the way I intended. So I think I can go on to the next step to print the angles and all that stuff.
I printed the angles, but if this all works out, I will make angles for the most common angles down to say 45 degrees. Once the angles were printed, I could also make sure that the dovetails of them was a good fit and then move on to the next step, which is to convert the Snapmaker to a CNC.
So this is the first time replacing a module, but I'm pretty confident I know how it works. I released the build plate heat cable, unlocked the clasp, and then removed the build plate. I'm just really happy I made the workbench for it so that I have somewhere to store all the parts. So let's put the build plate in and lock it down. Now, the CNC doesn't come with dust collection, but here's where the 3D printing community really shines, because this was uploaded to one of the platforms. Printed this, I can just attach it and use my dust collector to prevent all the dust from going inside of the machine. So now I think I'm ready to try it out.
But before I CNC'd that base, I was just really eager to try out the 4th axis it came with, so I tried turning myself into a chess piece. That attempt did fail, certainly because of something I did wrong, so I will try it later again. While the CNC was working, I attached insert nuts inside the angled prints. These are M5x10 and can of course be glued in to really sit tightly. When the CNC was done, I had one more thing I wanted to do before assembly, and that was to also try the laser of the Snapmaker to mark the plywood. So I once again did the switcheroo, removing the build plate for the CNC and placing the laser one inside. Then switching out the CNC head for the laser, and also cleaning up a bit since it catches some dust with the CNC running. But the good thing about this combo is that it came with the air purifier, which seems to clean the worst of the small dust particles, but where it really shines of course is for the laser fumes. This also came with a small compressor, but that's more for the laser cutting. The last part is 2 small 3D printed edge guides, so these go on the plywood base with screws. I prefer placing them in an angle. That way they will fit both a rounded tabletop and a rectangular one. And then the first prototype was ready to use.
Okay, we will have to try this out now. And I have this old tabletop. It's actually the first desk I ever built in my life. My first major woodworking project. It's not very flat. I don't care about that because we're gonna chamfer it. So first I need to figure out where the chamfer should start, and I think I can do that by just lowering the bit down in here to see where it actually hits. And the first time I'm gonna cut into the plywood of the base, of course. So I think the best way is to just lower the bit until you actually get to the point where you want the chamfer to start, and then you can kind of take it from there. So now I've broken into the plywood here, which means it'll be easier going back and forth. So now I think I can raise the bit up again and then start from the edge and just have at it. So one thing to consider is that when you get to the end, the reference point of the jig no longer has anything to reference from, which means you would have to add something here so that the reference point can keep going if you want to go all the way to the edge, which why wouldn't you? All right, let's lower the bit again a bit so I don't take too much at once with this Amazon router bit. And let's have at it. I mean, it actually works good. I've tried different depth here, but it certainly looks good. Like, I used an extra piece for the support around the edge, and with a bit of sanding, I think this will look really good. Now, there are two ways of using this. One is you go up and down with the router, as you saw me do. The other one is to lock it down, and that way you can slide the router this way, which would be better for bigger tabletops, I suppose. Now, of course, there will be links down in the description if you want to make one on your own. And hopefully I can do some future upgrades, and potentially with your input, because I have some ideas of my own. Of course, it isn't perfect from the get-go. And I have actually upgraded this one with a few upgrades in this one. You see, the different angles means that the holes in the 3D printed angle piece comes in different locations because of the angles. So I adapted the plywood base to have more adaptation for where the holes align. And I did that because I haven't had time to change the whole location on all the angled pieces. Also, I'm not sure yet, but maybe just 3D printing the threads would be enough instead of using the threaded inserts. I haven't tried it yet, but maybe that will work, because I really don't like prints that require hardware. And this is all the hardware I used for this project, and maybe they can be further reduced down or totally eliminated. Secondly, it would be really cool to have some kind of mechanism to change the angles instead of printing new blocks, but I haven't been able to figure that out just yet. So as it is right now, all you have to do to change the angle is print 2 new blocks, insert them, and you're ready to go. And of course, you won't have all the 3D printed angles ready to go, but you just print them as you need them. But for the most common ones, I made a wall hanger so that you can hang them and this jig on the wall. That means you could potentially print even more angles and wall holders, as much as you'd like. Now, what do you think? How can I further upgrade this jig? Maybe you can help me a bit.